they'll be able to reopen. The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has floated the idea of a scheme similar to Eat Out to Help Out, dubbed Seat Out to Help Out, but admitted it may not be the right time for a bailout. So if government help doesn't materialise, what can the sector do to survive? I'm joined by a panel of experts this afternoon. Philipa, the head of BECTU, the union which represents workers in the entertainment industry. Isabella Biase, who's a freelance sound engineer. Fiona, Allan, Chief Executive and Artistic Director of Birmingham Hippodrome, as well as the head of UK Theatre. And completing our quartet, Chief Executive of the Production Guild of Great Britain, Lyndsay Duthie. Hello to you all. Thank you very much indeed for being with us this afternoon. Philipa, with you first. Your union represents over 40,000 staff. A large proportion of them will be freelance as well, so this will have had a huge impact. Just describe for us some of the situations your members are finding themselves in.
Well, indeed, it has been a torrid time for lots of our members across the creative industries, but particularly, I think, for freelancers like Isabella, who many of whom actually have found themselves without any financial support during this period, because they haven't been eligible for either the government job retention scheme or the self-employed income support scheme. So, I mean, I think we've all found this period of time, the pandemic and lockdown, very difficult, but imagine not having any income during that period. And we've heard some terrible tales of things that our members have had to do to sustain themselves during this period. You know, people have lost their houses, they've had to take out loans, more debt. There's some really desperate family situations where two people in the household work in the same industry and are both freelancers. So they really have had a very difficult time. And, you know, we're really consistently calling for the government to do more to support freelancers and the self-employed more generally, but particularly obviously in the creative industries.
Yeah, and I mean, I've had tweets today from people with similar experiences. One describing not having worked, not having had any income at all since March, having burned through all of her savings and now selling her house because she is penniless. Isabella, at your experience, you're a freelance sound engineer. What has happened to you?
So since pandemic, basically, and especially since the lockdown, all the venues closed. So all our booked work disappeared overnight. So as a freelancer, unfortunately, like Philipa was saying, we didn't have any financial support until May, basically, with the self-employed scheme. So what I did, I just went to the shops that were around the place where I live, and I just started going from door to door asking for a job. And I was lucky enough to get a job in one of the supermarkets as a customer assistant, but that job finished because it was just temporary. And I was lucky because, like all of my colleagues, didn't find a job. Haven't since March. Haven't found a job, an alternative job. And needless saying, there's no work in the live industry at the moment. So live event industry. So we are pretty much in a limbo because at the same time, the government is telling the venues that they can open, but it's not, they're opening with big financial losses. So a lot of venues don't want to open. That means that we don't have work.
Yeah, and Fiona, you are one of those venues, the Birmingham Hippodrome. You've got a big new event to open, but it's very different. Just describe for us what you're doing.
Well, yes, we closed as a theatre on the 16th of March, and during the intervening time, we've refunded or exchanged sort of nearly £11 million worth of tickets and made nearly 50% of our permanent team redundant. But we are reopening, not as a theatre. We have completely reconfigured the interior of our building, and today, in fact, have opened our doors again to put on a live immersive digital experience called Van Gogh Alive, which is happening its UK premiere here with us in Birmingham and running until Christmas. And I'd have to say it will cover its own costs if we're lucky, but it's not enough to keep us afloat. We're doing it in order to stay relevant to the people of this region, not to have an enormous theatre in the centre of town continually closed.
And so you're becoming a gallery space, effectively, rather than a theatre venue.
Well, exactly. We looked at, I mean, our mission is to sort of enrich the cultural life of the region, and I had to think about how can we do that if we can't stage live performances in a cost-effective way. So we've ended up taking all the seats out of the bottom of the stalls in our auditorium, extending out a stage to be a massive flat floor, and turning it into a live gallery, a digital gallery space. It runs on a loop all day. It's a 45-minute long performance, if you like. And we can operate that with social distancing because we have timed entry every half an hour and can limit the number of people in at any given time.
And Lyndsay, this has been a particularly bleak week in terms of news for the film industry, the cinema sector, with Cineworld announcing it's to close its cinemas tomorrow. We've got Odeon reducing its opening at many cinemas. What is the picture like?
Well, it's been a difficult time across every sector, but for film and television, I think there's mixed fortunes. We're seeing the return to production, studios and broadcasters faring slightly better than the independent producer, and some departments doing better than others. So visual effects is a very busy department trying to enhance scenes without the extras in and so forth. The British Film Commission, working with ourselves and our counterparts, put together fantastic protocols to enable us to go back to working on set safely. But this is costing between 8 and 30% to productions to allow for these measures and to enable us to be safe.
And I think people will have seen, Lyndsay, some coverage of some of the measures that have been taking place by production. Just describe for us how it has shifted the way in which they're working.
Well, obviously, you're limited to the number of people you can have on set. So there's rotas in place, enhanced cleaning procedures, obviously no intimacy on set for certain scripts. So you're looking at rewrites for scripting, working in bubbles. I mean, there's a whole raft of different measures because film and TV crosses across all sectors. We've got makeup artists, set construction. So it's very comprehensive. But the crews and staff have behaved exemplary to try and enable this safe return. 50% of all film and TV workers are self-employed. So these are really difficult times, and we're all doing everything we can to move forward and to get content back in the cinemas. Obviously, streaming is a big winner, and we've seen phenomenal figures with Disney Plus doubling their subscribers between February to May. Netflix is, I can't even think how many now, 182 million subscribers. So we clearly want the content. We need the content. We're all at home, and we're doing everything we can to try and move forward. But it's tough.
Yeah, Lyndsay, while we're talking about Netflix, in the last hour or so, they've announced another £600,000 to an industry fund to help industry workers. That's been supported by the likes of Amazon, BAFTA, Sky as well. But whose responsibility is it? Is it the industry itself, as we've had these discussions within sport and whether the Premier League needs to help out the lower league clubs? Is it the industry or is it government responsibility?
I think it's a mixture. For those that are doing well, we should absolutely support others because Netflix, Amazon, all of those are going to need the content makers there. And if we don't keep them in work and keep that going, there will be no entertainment industry. So we have to do that. The government has to take some responsibility as well. For film and TV, we were desperately waiting on the government insurance scheme because we couldn't get any productions insured while COVID was on. And that's only really just kicked in last week, really, the applications for that. So that's a start. So I do think it needs to be a mixed approach. And for those that are doing better, of course, we need to help each other out to keep our industry alive and to keep that talent there. We can't lose that phenomenal talent.
Philipa, you wrote to Rishi Sunak in the early stages to alert him to the plight of workers that you represent. Do you feel that he listened?
Not entirely, if I'm being perfectly honest, because we were pointing out the plight of many thousands of freelancers who have fallen between the gaps. And we were asking him at that stage to fill those gaps. We were impressing upon him, you know, the creative industries brings 111 billion to the UK economy. It's really important that that industry, as Lyndsay suggests, continues to provide great content and great entertainment. So we think it would have been a really good investment to make sure that all of the freelancers in the industry received support through this period. And it is a responsibility of the government to make sure that they understand this industry and its needs. And Lyndsay just talked about, sorry.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, the government made a almost £1.6 billion investment in the arts and entertainment sector, didn't it? It described it as the biggest ever one-off investment. But what you're saying is there are many that still didn't benefit from that, despite the business rate reductions, despite the furlough scheme, despite the job support scheme.
Yeah, well, the arts recovery package, which the government announced halfway through the pandemic, actually the money from that is still to reach venues and theatres. So, and it's very much focused on, you know, being able to support buildings and keeping buildings open. And we are saying, actually, the important people here are the people who make theatre, the people who make events, films, and so on. And actually, we need to make sure that those skills are retained within the sector. I mean, yesterday there was the suggestion that people should go and do something else, retrain. But actually, as I've described, you know, it's such an important part of the economy, £111 billion, that really we should be ensuring that the industry can continue and that those skills are retained for when we come out of the end of this time.
Isabella, you were nodding along to a lot of what Philipa was saying there, particularly about keeping skills within the industry. The Chancellor was asked about it yesterday and he said, I can't pretend that everyone can do exactly the same job they were doing at the beginning of this crisis. I mean, he says he wasn't directly talking about the arts, although many thought that that was the case. Do you see a future in your industry, or do you feel that you have to look for other opportunities?
To be completely honest, I'm really worried at this stage of things. I'm really scared that my industry will not come back as it was, which is okay in a way, but especially we don't want to lose, like Philipa was saying before, all the crafts, all the skills that have been developed in years, because these kind of skills cannot be built or acquired like overnight. It's really important to support the workers and the companies as well that are working in live events, because if not, people will just like give up on it, of course, because they need to sustain their families, to sustain themselves. But yeah, everybody's really worried. And in some manufacturers, companies, there have already been a lot of redundancies. So the fear is that events are not coming back before next year, maybe summer next year, but it's more than 8 months away. So we cannot afford to lose the workforce of live events, of theatres, of arts as well, because that would mean to lose art itself, like culture itself, because we are the deliverers of cultures and music and arts. Without us, unfortunately, it would be very difficult, and it would be morally wrong not to sustain and help the arts.
Lots of people getting in touch with us with very similar experiences to yours. Isabella Biddy Ronell tweeted to say, I'm a full-time theatre and music performer, or was until March, worked in Asda for a bit, then NHS, now part-time in the NHS and part-time teaching. I'm lucky to have a fallback, but appalled by the sheer disregard for our industry and the people in it. Sam Beach, I'm a technical director and have worked in the industry for 20 years. Overnight, all of my work disappeared. There's very little happening, and there are too many of us to simply reskill for the limited opportunities available. We are an industry of workaholics who can't work. Many with similar accounts are getting in touch. And Isabella, I see you nodding. That definitely strikes a chord with you. What does the future look like, Fiona? I was looking at your what's on list for the Birmingham Hippodrome. It should be pantomime season coming up, of course. Next year, you've got some big name musicals on the calendar coming to you. But can you see it happening?
I hope it happens. I mean, we are fully booked with shows from the beginning of March, but we don't know yet whether we'll be allowed to go ahead with those without social distancing measures in place. So we are yet to see. We had to move everything out of this year, so we had a number of sold out performances. We were, productions were luckily able to move into next year, but it looks like we could quite possibly need to move those again. I think producers themselves don't have confidence at the moment. One of the things that everyone says it's going to take 4 to 6 months to get theatres fully operational and programmed again, and that's because every touring production in the country is sitting in storage somewhere and doesn't currently have a cast, and it will take some time to get all of those productions up and running. And also the producers need the confidence that they can go ahead and take financial risk on work, and for that reason, we really call on the government to support an insurance scheme similar to the one in film and television that can help producers underwrite getting shows back on the road when we're allowed to. But otherwise, there simply won't be the content for us to put on the stages. I think it's going to take a year or two to get ourselves back to any kind of, new normality.
Yeah, the new normality, that is it. I'm afraid that is all we've got time for, but thank you all very much indeed. Philipa, Isabella, Fiona and Lyndsay, thank you very much indeed for your contributions here this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now for a look at the weather.